Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. Kellen here with Droid Life. So we've got the OnePlus 3 still in-house working towards that full review, but we know that a number of you ordered it day one, and since OnePlus was ready to ship these things on day one, you've started to receive them. So to make sure you get everything out of this device from day one, we want to do what we always do, and that's give you the first 10 things you should do with the OnePlus 3. It's one of the first things we always tell you to do when a brand new phone has that little guy right there, which is a fingerprint reader, is set it up. It's there. You may as well use it. It's one of those things that it gives you that security, a level of protection, but it's also sort of a convenience thing, and it eliminates the need to swipe anything out, type in passwords, all of that. So you get security. So the OnePlus 3 happens to have a pretty good fingerprint reader. So what you do is pull that down, go into settings, choose security and fingerprint. And when you walk through the setup process, it'll actually ask you if you want to set these up, and you can set them up right through there. But if you haven't yet, just go in and do it. And so we always tend to recommend you do 4 to begin with, especially when you're looking at a front lower situated one like this. I set up both thumbs because you never know which hand you're going to be holding it in. And then because it is a lower front chin setup, you can use your fingers when it's lying on a desk. So I have both of these fingers set up as well. And so I can quickly unlock if it's laying down or I'm holding it. So step 1 is almost always, if it includes it, set up that fingerprint reader. Now from there, the other thing you always want to do is have your camera quickly available, right? So the OnePlus 3 has a pretty nice camera on it so far in our testing, and we'll talk more about that later, but you want to be able to get to it as quickly as you can. So with OnePlus, they actually allow you to set up a whole bunch of shortcuts to it. You can double tap the home button, or I'm sorry, the lock button over here, and that will jump you in there. If you're on the lock screen, there's a gesture where you can draw a circle, and that will get you in there. And then if you're just in the UI anywhere, you can actually double tap on the home button, and that will get you there as well. So when you have the OnePlus 3, the camera is always just a button or a swipe or a gesture away. So to set all of those up, there's a few things you're going to want to do. So if we go into settings, and scroll up here to displays, where you'll find the first one. I know this seems like an odd spot, but in display, there is a press power button twice for camera. And that's how you get this double click over here to launch the camera. So for sure, set that up, because you can do that from whenever, including when the phone is in sort of a lock state. Now the other ones you're going to have to set up in a couple different spots. So one is buttons. So we'll talk more about buttons in a second, but I have the on-screen nav buttons, but I also have the home button active. And so you can see right here under home button, there is a double tap action you can apply to that. And I have it as open camera. So that's why I can double tap, and that will then open the camera. Then the third one, you would have to go back to gestures. And so these are gestures from the lock screen. So if you're on the lock screen, you can just draw an O, and you want to check that box. You can just draw an O on your lock screen, and that will launch it as well. So a number of ways to get you quickly into the camera, which is something, again, we always like to do. So speaking of those lock screen gestures, you can set up a couple of those. I showed you drawing a circle, and that launches the camera. But there's also, let me lock it again. You can draw a V, and that turns on the flashlight. I don't know if a V, and another V will turn that back off. There's some other gestures that you can do to like change tracks, control music, and things like that. And so you'll find these in settings, gestures, and I forgot, there's also double tap to wake, which you should definitely take control of. But there's music control here, where you can do a 2-finger swipe to play or pause. I haven't enabled that one yet, but of course, I forgot about double tap to wake, and that will just wake your device in case you want to just check notifications or something like that. All right, so I talked briefly about my on-screen button setup. This would be the next tip, and you got to decide if you want on-screen or if you want to use capacitive buttons. So I know you can't really see it, but there actually is a button here and one here, and you can enable those if you want. And actually out of the box, it comes with those enabled and this big button set up as a home button. I tend to prefer on-screen, but it's up to you. So there is a toggle in settings buttons right up here. You can tap that, and I don't know if you could see that, but these 2 little dots down here actually do light up. So you can kind of see the lit up right there. And so they don't look like a back button or a recent button, but they are actual buttons. And so let's go back in there to buttons. And so once you have those set up, you can then assign all sorts of shortcuts to them. So the home button, like I said, I have a double tap it to open the camera, but you can also long press, which does sort of Google Now. But with these two capacitive buttons, you can do things as well. So on your recents button, you could have it do A long press could do any of these things, like also launch the camera, open a voice search or something like that. And so these are some things, if you do go the capacitive route, I would take a look at these shortcuts you can do, because you can really add some functionality. Again, I'm an on-screen button guy, and so I go on screen, but then I also check this little box for always enable home button. So I can always still tap that and it will take me back home, which is kind of a nice little shortcut. And then of course, enabling it also allows me to do that double tap action there. So from there, I would say, let's turn on some display settings. So if we go into settings and you go to display, there are a couple of things in here you should do. So the first one I would say is, if we scroll down here to ambient display. So if you've used a Nexus device, you probably kind of know what this is. If you've used a Motorola device, you sort of know the idea here. And that's basically when you get a notification in, to have your device sort of wake up gently in sort of a black and white mode and show you what your notifications are. And then you can interact with that as well. And then the other thing I would say is proximity wake, which allows you to wake your device just by waving your hand over it. So I'll enable that, and then I'll show you basically how this would work. So if your phone is lying like this and a notification would come in, ambient display would light up. If you just want to check the time, you can just do a wave over it like that. And then you can see that will light up the clock and date. And if you had notifications, they would show up there as well. So if I unlock here, and I'll just take a screenshot just to get a notification up there. So if I do have a notification, I can just wave over it. Try that one more time. And then you can see a notification shows up there. So if I had Hangouts or Gmail or something like that, you guys get the idea. But it's one of those things that's really, really handy, and I highly suggest you take a look at it. Another tip here in the display settings would be checking the color balance and getting it sort of to where you want it to be. So you can drag this and you can see it gets cooler if I go that way, which means a little bit bluer and cooler. And if I go this way, it just gets a little more reddish, a little warmer. So you just kind of adjust that to where your eye likes to look. One of the things to keep in mind is that on this phone, there is a night mode. And so if you tap that, it sort of gives you that amberish color, which is better on your eyes before you go to bed. It's just also easier on your eyes when looking at it in the light. But that's another display setting. But for when you're just generally using it, this is a good way to just sort of on the fly adjust it to what your eye really wants to look at. All right, so the next thing I would say is set up a battery saver option. So if we go into settings, battery, and you go into battery saver, there is an option in here where you can have your phone automatically go into a battery saving mode if you hit, say, 5 or 15%. You can see it here. You can actually turn it to go to never, or you can do it at 5 or 15%. I always suggest people set this up. It's like one of those set it and forget it settings. And I have mine set at 15%. And basically what that does is when you get to 15%, rather than you having to worry about turning everything off and adjusting things, it'll automatically then sort of go in, help improve battery life, reduce your device's performance a little bit, but it does so to sort of extend your battery. Because usually when you get to 15%, if you've got no charger around, right, you want to make sure that phone isn't dying on you. So again, it's just one of those set it and forget it things. All right, so the final little 10th tip here of the first things you should do is if you're using the OnePlus home screen, or launcher, I should say, there are two little shortcuts that you may as well get familiar with. One of those is just swipe down on the home screen, and that pulls your notification shade down. So it's a little bit bigger device, right? 5.5-inch display. So instead of having to reach all the way up there, just know that you can swipe down way down here, and it'll pull that down. And then the other direction, if you swipe up, it actually gets you into Google Now, or I'm sorry, just gets you into a search. So if you just swipe up right into a Google search, and then you can type out whatever you want to do. And that is pretty much it. Those are just the first 10 things you should do. We'll be back with more tips and tricks, full review. We'll talk about the camera, all that stuff. But if you do have the device already, that should be enough to get you going, at least out of the box. Comments, questions, let us know. We're Droid Life. Peace.